All right, listen up. Vinny here, back in the chair with the new Sentinel. If you're new, this ain't your civics teacher's podcast. We talk about how power's actually built. Not just the fairy tale, but the mechanics, the muscle, and yeah, the mistakes. Now today we're tearing open the black box. What makes a nation truly strong? Not the flag waving or the televised parades. I'm talking about the real stuff. Economic resilience, smart governance, relentless innovation, social cohesion, and this is big, alliances that matter. See, top advisors in the U.S., they finally figured out you can't just rush in swinging. You need sequenced action. Near term, you hit R&D, workforce pipelines, and supply chain resilience. You got a plan like you're moving pieces on a chessboard. Otherwise, you wind up with a handful of pawns and nobody guarding the king. And I gotta say, never outshine the capo. Every player, from your Silicon Valley disruptors to your Pentagon suits, they need clear marching orders. That means setting up federal R&D investments, making sure the next moonshot or interstate highway ain't just a headline, but a plan that's sequenced, monitored, and most importantly, funded beyond the next news cycle. Why do you think the moon landing worked, or the original highways? It was because the boys in D.C. actually lined up the pieces. They funded the tech, built the schools, kept factories humming, and stitched the country together with infrastructure you could drive coast to coast. You get that right, you get a country that's shock-proof, one that can take a punch and keep moving forward. If you rush, if you skip steps, you wind up with a house of cards. But when you sequence your moves, each play builds momentum. Next thing you know, you got economic muscle, public trust, cutting-edge research, and just as important, you can bring other countries to the table knowing you're holding aces, not just bluffing. That's the kind of playbook that keeps you king, not a cautionary tale. Now let's flip the script. You want to know how great powers get gutted from the inside? It ain't always a foreign army rolling down Main Street. Most times it's slow leaks, chronic deficits, corruption that rots you from City Hall to the State House, underfunded schools, society split down the middle. The sort of stuff that don't make headlines, but trust me, the streets know before the courts ever catch up. The policy wonks got a risk register. Problems like economic instability, governance breakdowns, health and climate disasters, cyber threats. But to me, that's just the polite version. Institutional gridlock? It's a power vacuum. When the City Zoning Commission tried to shake down my old man's business, yeah, this is real, not just theory. The court didn't solve it, the streets did. The lesson? The streets remember what the courts forget. I mean, look, persistent deficits, losing track of your debt, inflation rising, suddenly everyone's jumpy. But the real poison? When folks start believing the fix is in, when corruption eats through the firewall of your institutions. You get weak rule of law, schools falling apart, nobody trusts elections, everyone's fighting for scraps. It's not one fatal blow, it's 1,000 cuts. Weakening isn't always visible on the evening news. Sometimes it's a busted bridge, sometimes it's a hacked power grid, sometimes it's just a classroom with no teachers. That, friends, is how power evaporates. And when social cohesion snaps, when people stop believing the country's working for them, well, you get unrest, and suddenly the blueprint for being strong looks like a stack of burned notes. All right, so you want to play to win? Here's the thing. Strategy without execution is just a bedtime story. The U.S. policy brief? They talk about diagnostic baselines, setting priorities, phased timelines. That's just fancy talk for, you better map your own territory before you start a war, and you better count every asset and liability before you make a move. Imagine a sit-down I once ran. Old school, everyone's got a copy of the territory map, but only the sharp ones understood. Knowing where you can expand, where you're vulnerable, what's at stake, those are your metrics. If you're not tracking, you're playing blind, and blind men don't survive in my world. So the big moves? Set up a United States Policy Council, your board of capos, right? Put in oversight dashboards, baseline metrics for every domain, annual reports, sunset clauses. You got to hold operators accountable and make sure every policy gets reevaluated before it becomes dead weight. If you don't have a sunset, you end up funding zombie projects and nobody remembers why. And metrics aren't just for the accountants. You watch GDP, productivity, innovation rates, track corruption, health outcomes, disaster readiness, trust in institutions, all of it. It's how you catch weakness before it becomes a headline. Power respects power, and if you keep tabs like the best crew in the business, your enemies learn not to test your fence. If history's taught Vinny anything, it's this. The ones who build systems with eyes wide open, they survive. The rest, they get written up as tragic footnotes. So, play smart, play strategic. That's all for today. We'll pick this up next time, because the game, it never stops.